The proconsul of Cisalpine Gaul was looking to expand the borders of Rome. In the region, there were a lot of raids on the outskirts, stopping reliable communication. Citizens of Rome did not want to move into these lands because they were far too dangerous. The proconsul planned to take Gaul one city at a time. After constantly losing battle after battle, the Gauls were fed up. Tribes set their differences aside to make a single army to stop the Roman invaders. They appointed a man with proven battlefield experience, and he knew the ins and outs of the Roman military. After the elders convened, they picked Vercingetorix to lead them. The battleground was chosen at Alesia. Gaul is a territory now composed of the modern countries of Belgium, France, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. Each clan in Gaul had their own political systems, which were pretty similar to one another. A group of elders would form a council advising their king. Most of the decisions involved local tribes going to war with one another. So, when the Romans invaded in 121 BC, there was no large force to stop them. Under Rome's occupation, a baby was born that was going to stand up for the people of Gaul. Celtulus was a powerful leader and aristocrat in Gaul and commanded the Urbani. In 80 BC, he had a son, Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix means victor of 100 battles. This was not his real name, but the only name that he is known by. The Gauls kept their birth name a secret, known only to themselves and their close family, since they believed that the knowledge of a person's true name gave others power over them. When Julius Caesar expanded his governorship into Gaul, he knew that the wind was blowing against him. He needed to bulk up his troops with foreigners. Caesar immediately hired mercenaries from the Gallic territories. Vercingetorix was one of them. The Romans laid waste to the enemy Gaul tribes with the help of their own people. Vercingetorix was torn between sides, so he officially left the Roman service. He learned so much from the Roman military and decided to use their own tactics against them. When he convened with the elders, he was not advised to go to war with Rome because it would lead to total conquests. As revenge, in 52 BC, Vercingetorix annihilated the settlement of Cernabrum. A guerrilla war then ensued. Word was sent out to all the leaders of Gaul to send military support before Caesar's arrival. Countrymen used a scorched earth tactic to prevent and delay Julius Caesar's marching army from Spain. Scorched earth is a tactic where a defending force destroys all food, crops, animals, tools, and resources that they cannot take with them. This limits the amount of supplies an attacking force can find in the area, leading to long baggage trains, slowing the attacker's mobility. Once Caesar arrived with his legions, they slaughtered 39,000 citizens of Avaricum. This helped Vercingetorix's cause by doubling the size of his army. Later, he persuaded mercenaries to turn on Caesar, and they slowed down his baggage train. This victory led to Vercingetorix's rise in popularity as a military leader. At Byracte, the Gallic tribes assembled to choose a leader. Up until this point, they had many local disputes, but when the Romans invaded, the Gauls needed a larger army. In 52 BC, Vercingetorix was designated to lead them, and he proved himself on the battlefield. He went straight to work getting the new tribesmen under his command. His cavalry was sent out to fight Caesar at Bingen. The Gallic cavalry was routed, and Vercingetorix made the bold move of retreating with a larger force. Vercingetorix had 80,000 soldiers, while Caesar had 60,000, and 10,000 of them were Germanic mercenaries, mostly cavalry units. The Gallic leader went out to the nearby town to hold out until more reinforcements arrived. In September 52 BC, Vercingetorix was pushed back to Alesia. Messengers were sent out in all directions to ask for more support. Vercingetorix determined that Alesia could survive a siege for 30 days. The town of Alesia, at which the two rival armies had now met for the final conflict, was perched on a summit of a high plateau, so steep that the capture otherwise than my investment was practically impossible. The first thing Caesar did was order his troops to start the construction of a wall 13 feet high. The length of this wall would be a staggering 10 miles long. Vercingetorix saw that his men were going to be trapped. He responded with his cavalry, supposedly numbering 15,000, and Caesar's Germanic mercenary cavalry, in which the Germans utterly routed the Gauls. The Gauls were slaughtered all the way back to Alesia. Vercingetorix debated about keeping his cavalry inside of those city walls, but ultimately decided to let them leave during the night. These surviving units snuck past the Romans, being sent off to find more reinforcements. While the Gauls sat there and waited, Julius Caesar continued to build his contravallation walls. He also built a series of trenches. Some were as wide and deep as 14 feet, and some were filled with water from the rivers. When the guards notified Caesar that messengers were sent out, he did not panic. He did something that was not expected by the Gauls or his own troops. Caesar ordered his 11 legions to construct another wall to their backs. The circumvallation wall was longer than the first at almost 13 miles. It took 3 weeks to complete. Word reached Caesar and Vercingetorix that reinforcements were on the way to help Gaul. A council meeting was held and all the women, children, and sick were let out of the city. This was done to save the food rations and to overwhelm Caesar. Caesar knew that he was in the middle of the wilderness and had no reinforcements, so he chose to not help the citizens of Alesia. The people walked all the way back to Alesia, and in a turn of heart, Vercingetorix, the consul, and the Gallic warriors did not open the gates. The citizens began to panic. They were trapped in no man's land and were left to starve to death as both sides watched. Gallic reinforcements arrived and they had a staggering number of troops. One of the leaders just so happened to be Versicollanus, Vercingetorix's cousin. How many more warriors came to fight? Julius Caesar claims 248,000, Plutarch claims 300,000, and Strabo 400,000. Most modern estimates place this figure around 100,000 men. Any way you cut it, Caesar was outnumbered, only having 50,000 legionaries and 10,000 Germanic mercenaries. Overall, it was 3-to-1 odds. The relief army went on the attack as soon as they arrived. The reinforcements quickly filled in the exterior trenches and sent their cavalry in. Hours of fighting took a toll on both sides. Germanic mercenaries already stopped Vercingetorix's cavalry, and now they were going to stop his cousins too. All throughout the afternoon, the battle raged blindly, victory inclining now. The Roman horsemen pushed their pursuit almost as far as the enemy's entrenchment. Thus, the first round of the great contest was over. Romans got a taste of the Gallic might and were lucky. While the main fighting happened on the outside walls, to their backs, Vercingetorix was making his way down from the city, but they were prevented by the obstacles in their path. Once Vercingetorix saw the relief force withdraw, he headed back to the city. Throughout the next day, the Gauls were preparing their troops, building hooks, ladders, and tying ropes for the night attack. This caught the Romans by surprise. Vercingetorix's army also moved out, but were bogged down by the trenches again. With the cover of night, and with his cousin's aid on the outside walls, he was able to fill these trenches in. In between the walls, the Romans were undermanned, and it seemed like they were going to lose ground fast. 2 legionaries, Trebonius and Antony, were in charge of holding up the walls. They pulled troops from sections of the walls that were not being attacked and redirected them to the front. Taking a leadership role like this proved to Caesar that both Trebonius and Antony could be trusted with more military decisions. As dawn began to break, Vercingetorix was forced to retreat as well, since his compatriots on the outer wall had to retire. Versicollanus spotted a Roman weakness on a hill and took 60,000 tribesmen. This was a weakness that Caesar knew about, and he had 2 legions in a defensive position on the hill. The rest of the 40,000 Gauls moved around the whole perimeter to find soft spots. Julius Caesar knew that this was going to be a huge problem. He only had 60,000 men to hold off 2 armies on both sides. Hopefully the army from Alesia would not come out to fight. Well, once Vercingetorix saw the commotion, he made his move. He concentrated his force on a single section of the wall. Now Caesar was truly facing 3-to-1 odds. The Romans were moved off the hill. The Gauls crashed down onto the wall. They climbed and broke down the walls, infiltrating the fortifications. Just like Mark Antony the night before, Julius Caesar rode around the walls, pulling men and sending them into the hole. Nobody was left to rest. Caesar had 1 card left, but they had a little advantage in a defensive siege attack. He rounded up all the horsemen and used them to defend a section of the wall. Strangely enough, the cavalry somehow beat the Gauls in this area with little fight, so they rode out of the walls, retook the hill, and then crashed down on the Gauls, killing all in their path. Once Versicollanus was stopped, all the troops began to falter on the outer walls. Vercingetorix didn't know this was happening, and decided to spread his troops thinner and attack all of the areas of the interior wall. Caesar repositioned his troops to quell the interior attacks. The Gauls were defeated and headed back to Alesia. The next day, Vercingetorix came out, putting his best armor on and adorning his horse, rode out of the gates, and made a turn about Caesar as he was sitting. Then quitting his horse, threw off his armor, and remained quietly sitting at Caesar's feet until he was led away to be reserved for the triumph. After the siege and battle of Alesia, Vercingetorix was taken captive by Caesar for leading the revolt in Gaul. Years later, Caesar had his quadruple triumph celebrating his 4 wars against Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Numidia. This was noted as the most spectacular triumph, bringing in a total of 2,822 crowns of gold back to Rome. No king would be a match for Caesar, and at the end of his triumph, Vercingetorix was executed by Garat. a type of strangulation where the executioner would turn a wheel to tighten a rope around the guilty's neck. With the wars over, there would be much more to come for Caesar. Thank you for reaching the end of this lesson. Claude's history course teaches history buffs about important world history events. Become a Patreon and have your name listed at the end of each lesson. For more informational videos like these, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Comment down below on which person or event you want to see covered next. We will see you on another lesson soon on Claude's history course.